So we did a special episode with Mother Tongue, with Patrisse Cullors and Rabbi Brous. This is the most intense episode we've done to date. It was insanely emotional, difficult to get through without crying, and raw, because you could basically feel the vibration of everyone's pain, like throttling off their skin and off their flesh. And it wasn't just their pain, it was generations and generations and generations of pain. I really love Patrisse and Rabbi Brous for being willing to be in a safe space to really learn and talk and share with each other so that other people could learn from us what a courageous conversation looks like. I think they are both such incredible human beings and really important in this moment where we are looking for new leaders to show us what a courageous relationship and a courageous love and a courageous understanding and a courageous level of empathy and a courageous level of forgiveness can look like. And so I'm really grateful to both of them and to our friends at Mother Tongue for working on this episode with us. And we really, really hope that you'll take the time to listen to it and give us some feedback on what you think. Thanks for listening. Welcome, everybody, to a special collaboration and episode between Reset the Algorithm and Mother Tongue magazine. Really excited. This is like a really special segment with two special friends and guests. They came to me to sort of curate a larger conversation around empathy, and I couldn't think of two people that invoke empathy and make me think about empathy and are really non-binary thinkers in a world in where the world has become so binary and looking to squeeze big ideas and big emotions and big histories into teeny tiny little boxes. And so welcome, Rabbi Brous and Patrisse. I'm happy to see both of you.
Thank you. So glad to be with both of you.
I'm so happy to see the both of you. Like, I just, even being in the presence of both of you, like, makes me want to like laugh and cry and cuddle and run and hide and like tell you where my boo-boos are and tell you what I'm afraid of and confess the like things I've been doing that maybe I'm not sure about. And so I'm really grateful to you. I've been aware of both of your work for a very long time. I have always been, I think, a little jealous that I'm not Jewish, because I like would like I like always wanted to like go to Ikar and be like a member of that community. Just because I think just because I think what you do is so special. And Patrisse, I don't know, you're like my, what's the word? We're figuring it out, but I adore you, and I love relationships in life that push you to be a better person. And so thank you both for doing this with me and trusting me blindly and just saying yes when I sent you an email to do this project. So thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to talk about something that I have been thinking a lot about. I'm a daytime venture capitalist, as you know. My daytime job as an entrepreneur is to talk about inventing and investing in next generation of businesses. And so you spend a lot of time thinking about the economy. And something that sort of came into my head a few weeks ago is like, what is the economy of empathy? Mm-hmm. What is like the stock market? You know, what are the markets we're following? Everyone's so excited today, like Bitcoin's mooning, but like, you know, what's the economy of empathy? Like, how do we get empathy to like be something that we are measuring and looking for, and that it actually is like a natural part of the ecosystem of everything we do, versus like an afterthought of something you do only when something bad happens? Or it's like I feel like we have such a transactional relationship to empathy when there's such a huge economy around empathy. If you think about societies and families and communities that thrive, there's like this through line of empathy. And it's an economy of like taking care of each other.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about, what does the economy of empathy, like if you could create things and influence things today, like how would we create an economy of empathy?
Love that question. and also just like equally grateful to be here in this conversation. As the both of you know, I just lost a really amazing human being in my life. She's transitioned. Her name was Kikanza, and like honestly, all I can hear is her voice answering this question. She led as like one of the most empathetic leaders I've been able to be around and witness. A lot of my understanding of how to do the work that I do has much to do with what she taught me, both verbally, but also just how she lived her life and her legacy. She spent the last half of her life focusing on children and being with children and being a caregiver and creating an environment where children could thrive, because she understood that young beings will become older beings. And so much of the world that we live in, especially in the West, but especially in America, is not just an absence of empathy, but it's frowned upon, especially in deep crisis and conflict. It's as if the thing that we're supposed to hold on to is our pain, our rage, and our anger, which I think are very important emotions because we are full human beings. But I do think, in my spirit and my body and the way that I want to model living my life and practice my living my life, is as an empathetic person, as someone who can feel my own feelings first, which then allows me to feel the feelings of others and gives me more spaciousness to be present around what's possible, what is possible beyond the pain and the rage and the anger, because those are base level emotions that are important. But if we stay in the rage, if we stay in the anger, for me, that actually just creates more fire, and fire burns things down. And so when I think about this question of the economy of empathy, I often think about what would be possible if every single system, every single structure in our society was actually built on care, on empathy, on compassion, on love. We would not have police. We would not have prisons. We would not have military. We would not have war. We just wouldn't. That's not how we would orient around how we are with each other and with all living beings and with the planet.
It's so interesting because empathy is a natural human expression, right? I mean, we understand the science of empathy is that when you see somebody bang their knee, you like cringe and grasp your knee, and we mirror back each other's experiences naturally. And yet we live in a culture where there's such a profound empathy deficit. And so what happened to change, to sort of adjust our biology so that we don't do the thing that we're inclined to do, which is feel for each other and see ourselves in each other, and take in someone else's pain as also doing harm to us, right? We're like, what would it mean for us to feel that invested in each other's humanity, that your pain is also something that I can feel so deeply because I understand human pain. And I think that, part of this has to do with tribalism and just the damage that's been done as we've segmented ourselves in our society so that we can, we found our core groups and we can feel with and for our core groups. And now we know that there's an inverse relationship between the depth of connection and love and empathy that we feel for people who are like us to the amount that we feel for people who we perceive not to be like us. And I think it's created this kind of hostility where there should be a natural inclination toward, and instead there's a repulsion from. And what you're asking is such a profound question. I mean, what if we could redo the very fabric of our society so that instead of feeling segmented away from, apart from, and repelled by the other, we actually could see ourselves with and in the other, how would that reshape our policies? How would that reshape our encounters with strangers, with loved ones, with coworkers? It seems like everything changes if we could shift that core dynamic.
You know, part of what moved me about your conversation last night was, how do we behave when we're hurt? How do we behave when someone hurts us? And Patrisse and I have sort of been in this very deep discussion of like, what does demilitarized thinking mean? What does it mean to demilitarize our thinking, to demilitarize our behavior, our actions? And we're stuck in this world right now where leadership, I think the furthest priority for them on the planet is empathy. Just nothing about it feels, before even the 7th, it just hasn't felt empathetic in a very long time. And I think what you're doing with your community at ECAR is like, can see that you're building this community with a reset of values and systems. But I think, why is it that you think that we continue to elevate leadership that has deprioritized empathy, but highly prioritized militarized thinking? Like, how did we get here?
I was speaking with a psychologist last month who said it's really difficult, perhaps even impossible, to experience empathy if you don't have social safety. So when we don't feel protected, when we don't feel safe, it's hard. It's very hard for us to see the humanity in another person, because our core need is to get ourselves and our people safe. And I think that there's a kind of zero-sum thinking that goes with that aligns with this, which is, even though we're naturally inclined toward empathy, we are also naturally inclined toward our own personal social safety and the social safety of our tribe, whether that's our immediate family or people who look like us, think like us, vote like us, etc. And it ends up leading us down this path where, it's us or them. It's either I'm going to be safe or you're going to be safe. And I think, Patrisse, what you're offering is, and part of the reason I'm so moved by your writing and by your leadership, is this vision of, like, what if we step away from the world as it is and actually imagine something completely different, something that seems totally impossible in this reality, but we create a kind of dreamscape of a world that's actually fueled by love instead of by a shortage of love. What would that mean? And I think our political leadership, Moj, the folks I think that you're speaking about and thinking of, they're driven by this kind of zero sum, like, I need it for me and I will therefore take it from you. But this more expansive thinking is, what kind of future could we share where there's enough love and care and safety to go around for all of us to have? And it's not, I get it at your expense or you get it at mine, but we can all thrive in that kind of reality. And the thing about our community, to answer your question about how we've been trying to build that at ICAR, I realized, the morning after the 2016 elections, we put our kids to bed that night, and the next morning they woke up and they came running into our bedroom. And I remember that my littlest one, my son Levi, he picked up my phone and he said, Siri, who's the president of the United States? He asked the phone the question and got the answer. And all three of them,
the president of the United States.
Okay, we're going to cut that. Thank God. Yeah, we're going to cut that. I'm airplane that. I don't know what happened. Okay, let's start again. That's really funny. Okay, we put our kids to bed election night 2016, and they woke up the next morning and came running into our room asking us, who had won the election. And we told them, and they just threw their little bodies on the ground and they were crying. And they were so worried about, for us and for all the people we love in the world who we knew were going to now be on the front lines. And we just became so much less safe than we had been the day before in this world. And our vision of what the world could look like was just moved so much further away. And I had this moment where I just had this moment of clarity. And I said to them, listen to me. I said, everything that we cared about yesterday, we still care about today, but even more so. And every value that we held about who we were trying to be in the world, patient and forgiving and loving and empathic and justice driven, all of those things are still true, but now even more so. Because the more cruel the world becomes, the more we have to hold on to those core values. And the kids were like, okay, Ima, okay, like nodding through their tears. And then I went to Shabbat services that of just a few days later. And the whole community was like my three little kids on the ground crying, and I said, listen to me, everything we were last week, we are now, but even more so. And I said, it's our responsibility now to build this community into an oasis of love and justice. The more cruel the world becomes, the more critical it is that we actually turn to one another with love and we create a counter testimony to the reality out there. That's what we're building here. We are building the beloved community in here, even as we move further and further away from the reality of, or even the possibility of the beloved community out there. And I think that that's been our guiding value through the last many years, that actually there's so much we really cannot control out there in the world. And it's not just our political leadership. I mean, the amount of human cruelty that we're experiencing right now is so profound, and it could actually destroy our bodies and our spirits. And our response has to be to create smaller, intimate spaces where we can actually manifest those values, so that then it can have a reverberative effect and ultimately be transformative out in the broader space.
Think of both of you as two people that are really pushing forward a very controversial energy and agenda right now in the world. Whenever I bring up either one of your names, it's always met with, I love this person, but they're kind of on the fringe. And, I'm not sure that I'm prepared to give what they're asking. They're not realistic. They're not thinking about this, in reality. They have a lot of great ideas, but how? And I always think about the three founders of BLM and where they stood in 2015, and like three young women standing there, like with these crazy images, like standing against police brutality. Like that is like, I still get like these goosebumps up and down my body when I think about the difference in weight and power and influence in that moment. It was so not of the time to care and stand for these things. But I think of yourself the same way, Rabbi Brous. Like, how did the both of you stand in front of these other, these leaders that have power? How do you approach changing their minds? Like getting them to think like from here, not here, like how do you do that?
Well, I'm not afraid of the fringes. I was always the person who was different from everybody else. I was always the one who dressed weird going to school. I was always the one, who just kind of was on another path. And so personally, I am very used to my personality. And but I'll say that when I was able to sort of match what was already happening in my spirit with a movement, a progressive movement, and in this case, pre-BLM days, I was a community organizer, on the ground community organizer. I was getting on the bus and asking people to fight transit racism. I was going into high schools, asking young people to tell us about the truancy tickets they were getting from police so that we can end daytime curfew. I helped get the first ever youth bus pass. I was a poor kid. I was a bus rider, and it cost a lot of money to ride the bus. And I wanted to take on public transit and I wanted to get youth their bus pass. And so I did. And then, you know, I made the bold choice to take on the largest jailer in the world, which is the Los Angeles jail, the Los Angeles jail system. And I remember Moj and Rabbi Brous. I remember the first interview I ever did with a journalist, and I was telling her my vision. And in the middle of me telling her my vision, she laughed at me. And she said, "You're not being realistic. I will write these things down, but I want to tell you, I've been covering this for a really long time. You're not being realistic." And it didn't matter to me because I knew what I had experienced my whole entire life from this system, which was utter devastation. And I knew that I didn't deserve it. I knew my community didn't deserve it. And I also knew that the people who thought they were being protected from me and my family, that wasn't true protection. That wasn't true protection. And so I did my interview. I let her laugh at me. And I spent a decade listening to elected officials tell us meeting after meeting that we were being unrealistic. But I still organized, I still protested, I still had small community meetings asking people where they would vision $3.5 billion going. Nobody ever said a jail. Nobody ever said policing. Everybody always said, oh, we need more housing. Oh, we need access to healthy food. Oh, we need green space. And so this big imagination that I often ask people to use, we are doing it every day. We are doing it every day. And it's not that far off because we see a lot of communities that already are living in the imagination. They just have more resources. They don't have a police system in the way that we do. So when we won the fight to end the jails and jail expansion in LA County, all I could think about was that interview and how I didn't lack imagination. The journalist did. She lacked imagination. And that the potential and possibility of changing our world is more worth it for me than being laughed at by others.
Amen. It's incredible to hear you talk like this, Patrisse. And I was thinking as I read the Abolitionist Handbook and just listened to your voice, you know, sharing this wisdom, that one of the core elements of Jewish life, of our faith and our tradition, is Shabbat. And the way that Shabbat appears in the Hebrew Bible is, it says 6 days a week you should do all your work in the world, and then on the seventh day, that's a holy day. That day is separate and apart for holiness. And the way that we understand it is that we don't remove ourselves from the world. We don't detach from the world as it is. We're very clear-eyed about where the challenges are, where the problems are, where the pain is. And you can't be in the work all the time. You have to step out of the work to dream and to imagine something that's different from what the reality is. You can't get so bogged down in the reality that you forget that the whole world stands on great dreams, that everything great in this world was at some point impossible. And, you know, one of my kids' teachers said the other day, I'm so struck by this, like, it wasn't until 1982 or 1983 that someone figured out that you could put wheels on a suitcase. You know, like people, literally, people were like schlepping heavy suitcases, and someone's like, wait a minute, why can't we do this better? Like, you roll your bag. And so what are the things that we haven't even dreamt of yet? And what does it mean to be in this kind of constant, perpetual engagement with that dreamscape that allows our activism to be driven by our imagination? And there's a teacher of mine, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who he says this is what, there's a kind of, it calls us into a permanent state of revolution, right? Because you're constantly stepping out of what is and dreaming. And then that dream has to inform the way that you engage. Because if you dream of a world in which all people live with dignity, and you see all people as created in the divine image, you can't then go back into the world and see this reality and not be totally affronted by it. And so you like you're in this constant cycle of engagement and then reimagination, engagement and reimagination. And I really it resonates so profoundly what you're saying. And the other piece that I feel just very personally is that when we started Ikar, it was 20 years ago, and people were not happy that when we started this community. There were a lot of synagogues in Los Angeles. There, speaking of the economy of empathy, and the kind of zero sum mentality, there was this sense that even though 75% of the Jews in Los Angeles were not affiliated with any synagogue or institution or any part of the established Jewish community, but as soon as we started our community, there was this sense that we were like going to pull from this limited marketplace of people. And so we were competitive with the institutions, which I had no intention of competing with the institutions. I wanted to speak to all the people who weren't resonating to what existed. And so I remember that somebody took my vision statement, all we started with, we had no money and no space, but we wrote out a vision. And I essentially said, religion in the public space right now is increasingly defined by insularity, extremism, and regression, and even violence. And at exactly the moment that we need to build a faith-driven force that's a counter testimony to that, our faith communities have become more cowardly, less morally clear, and more afraid to step into the fray. And so we need to build something that can draw upon our prophetic tradition, et cetera, et cetera. So I wrote this vision down, and a professor took hold of it and said exactly what this literally like brought it to his graduate students and laughed at my vision statement and said, mark my words, in 6 months, nobody will ever have heard of this, ill-fated experiment. And I think about it all the time. Like, people really did not want to believe that this could be possible. And it was impossible until it wasn't anymore. And that is a great source of hope for me in this world. Both in America and around the world, I feel like the fact that the impossible becomes our next reality if we're willing to dream it and then work toward the fulfillment of that dream.
It's clear to me why I seek both of your company. Because I have been told numerous times that my dream of a free, thriving, demilitarized Middle East is impossible. I'm going to cry.
No, take your time, Moj. You get to be a full human being even when you're interviewing us.
I dream of a Middle East that is thriving, safe, lovely, romantic, beautiful, seducing, a place that we want to build things, see each other. There's so many ancient rituals and foods and people that are so beautiful. Everyone from Yemen to Syria to Iran to Afghanistan, Israel, Palestine. Like, I just think of that region. And I think that's why I came to Patrisse, because for someone to take on the police system in our country, I was like, hey, Patrisse, I know a really, really, really worthy opponent of your vision that is the largest humanitarian offender in crisis. And I'm clear why I'm so attracted to both of you, because I have this dream that this place is somewhere that is not where all of our military equipment and people and dead bodies, but that it's gorgeous and beautiful and known for what it really is, which is the cradle of civilization and really the land of so much invention, so much beauty. It smells good there. I like the Middle East. And so that's my dream. So I'm sharing it with both of you. And I've it's as Patrisse and I talk about, it's a many decades of work, but I think it's possible. And so I guess the question I have is peace on the table today? Because everyone says to me, these things are not on the table. 2 states not on the table, peace, ceasefire is not on the table, humanity, nothing is on the table. Nothing that remotely feels like the 3 of these people right now is on the table. How do we de-escalate and get back to peace is on the table?
I have a few thoughts about that. First, thank you for sharing. I mean, even just saying those words, Moj, I've never heard someone articulate that vision. I've never heard somebody talk about what it might be like to just travel and visit and live in those places in peace. I mean, so thank you for saying it, because I actually think even just saying it out loud is an act of justice. It's planting a seed for a different kind of possibility. I like, if we could imagine, saying to someone in like 1939 in Europe, could you envision a reality in which someone might take a plane from New York and land in Paris and visit the Eiffel Tower and then go to Berlin and eat the best vegan food and then fly and then stop in London and do they would have said, are you out of your mind? There will never be such a reality in Europe. I mean, these people were like millions and millions of people murdered, by each other in that place in 2 world wars. And now essentially, you can go rent a bike in Bruges and then go, go to the opera in Vienna. Like it's just it's a reality that nobody could have imagined back then. And so I think even just saying it out loud actually matters in a very real way. I have heard, I spent part of what's so painful about the post-October 7th reality and the kind of binary thinking that has taken hold in our public discourse is that, as I think the 3 of us have discussed, I've never before experienced an anti-war movement that's not also a peace movement, right? Like when people protest against wars, it's usually that they're saying, all we're saying is give peace a damn chance, and here that's not what people are saying. They're not calling for peace. And so that's part of what I think is so broken about this moment. And even given that reality, I have heard more reasonable, thoughtful, smart people talk about a 2-state solution, about some kind of created, confederated, in and out, about the standing together vision of a just shared future. I mean, these ideas that we've been trying to, amplify and promote for the last 2 decades, now all of a sudden are drawing crowds of thousands when they're offering these visions and in their voices. I'm talking about Israelis and Palestinians who are speaking together about what a future could look like. So on one hand, in the street, you don't hear people calling for peace, which is crazy. And on the other hand, we may be closer to peace now than we were, a year ago in some very, strange way, because those visions are actually being heard and I think being taken seriously now in ways that people had just, basically dismissed those visions, and said, like, it's over. We passed the time where this could have been possible is now in the past. And now I think that people are seriously saying we've got to make this a reality, because eternal war is not an answer.
I mean, it's going to make us sick, right?
It already is.
I think we're sick inside from it. I feel the presence of, on a cellular level, unwell. And this started for me way before the 7th. It's like Afghanistan made me sick. Iraq made me sick. Iran, Iraq made me sick. Syria has made me sick. The 7th made me sick. Now Gaza just makes me perpetually sick. And so in a world in where part of what I think a lot about is growing up for me, the people who are the most influential to me were like my grandmother, my aunt, my teachers, like a handful of teachers, some uh, different counselors at school. Maybe it was an artist or someone I was listening to, a record or something I read. And now I think we have a whole generation, not just young people, all people being raised by influencers. And I call them the big war energy influencers. And on all sides, right? We're not, it's just like it's like a unanimous big war energy platformed, influencers. And so how do we, and part of the intention of reset the algorithm is to literally end the era of influence and to platform leaders, real coalition leadership, people who can build communities, who want to build coalitions and communities. And so in this world where we're all fighting an algorithm, what do you think of like these influencers, and what do you think our role is in a world that's fighting for our space within an algorithm?
I want to speak to this. Because I want to also just like talk about the US, America, and its role in creating so much harm domestically and globally. And, it's very, sorry, I don't know how that happened because I thought it was on. 1 second, let me just make sure it's on Do Not Disturb. It is. I don't know. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
On your end?
I have a
Okay.
ring through for my wife, so that happens sometimes.
It was my mom. I'll back up. Part of what I think is like really important in this conversation is the U.S. role and creating so much harm domestically and also globally. I think, my first protest ever was after 9/11. I didn't get to vote for that president. I wasn't old enough yet. And I remember going to Pershing Square here in Los Angeles and seeing millions of people on the streets. And I didn't have like an understanding of the Middle East. I didn't have but I knew that I didn't like where we were going as a country. And in true Patrisse fashion, like I did a deep dive. I started to read everything I could read on the US's role in causing harm. And I felt so much shame. I felt so much shame for what this country had done and what it was doing. I felt so much shame about where my tax dollars were going. And it felt very important to me to commit myself to holding our governments accountable for that harm and to make them better and to make them, and not to just focus on domestic issues, to think about the rest of the world because we are a part of a human family. And so I think for me, part of the answer of this question is like, community organizing and activism for me was never about ego and influence. In fact, I didn't even know that would happen. That I was never thinking about that. All I was thinking about was, how do we save ourselves from these big governments that are not actually prioritizing human beings, the planet, all living beings. I really got into community organizing and activism because I was afraid for our future. I was afraid for the human condition. And so my kind of begging to people who have decided to use their platforms, whether that is social media influencers or elected officials, to create more harm, I really, from like the bottom of my heart, I'm begging for us to reorient yourself around our humanity, around what we deserve, which is compassion, care, love, connection, resilience. And if we are countering that, if we're antithetical to that, that's not just that will deeply impact you as well. We have to recognize that when we're calling for harm of others, that is actually calling for harm of ourselves. That's what I believe. And so, and I believe that because I believe we are all connected. And that is not like some airy fairy stuff. That's like science. We are all connected. What happens somewhere else impacts the place I'm at right now. So for me, it's, I really try my hardest, especially these days. I turned 40 last year. So like the way even I relate to all this is so different than even 10 years ago, or even 15 years ago, or even 22 years ago when I started organizing. I remember when we used to leave voice messages on our voicemail for people to call us. When I was like 19 or 20 years old and I first got my cell phone, yes, Gen Zers, there's a time where people did not have cell phones and you got them when you were older. I remember leaving this voice note for my voicemail, which is literally screaming into the phone. So if someone called me, they would get to my voicemail, and they would hear Patrisse Cullors saying, "It's all about the struggle. It's all about the fight." I had a lot of rage. I was processing a lot. And then, the evolution of that is me, literally doing abolitionist meditations and having people listening to me meditate. And that's truly my arc. I believe everybody has the ability to transform. So I try my hardest not to. Can I curse on here?
Yes.
Can I curse in front of you, Rabbi? I try not to shit on anybody. It's just like not in my, I don't have the bandwidth, I process, but I try not to be like an F you. Like, I'm not interested in that. But I do think, and that's because of my belief system. I'm an abolitionist. I think we all have the ability to transform. So my call to action for folks who are sitting and clinging to their rage and pain right now, feel it, because it's necessary human response. Boom. And allow yourself to transform, because that's also a human response. Human beings do transform. We have the capacity and the ability to. We just have to want to.
You are a little bit off social, Rabbi Brous. You're like, you have a funny relationship with social,
How can you tell?
Well, I
is it my equanimity? Is it my my hope and my optimism that gave it away? Yeah.
I sort of realized it when I initially started to DM you, and I was like, I don't think this is her talking back to me.
No, no, it's not.
And then when we were connected, you said, I don't really like to go on there. I thought to myself, how interesting that the one person who has the spiritual, intellectual space to process this and help us guide this is timidly sort of touching these. And we have these people that they're putting a lot of content out there that's really harmful, that I truly actually believe in my heart that they are responsible for the hurting and pain of people here domestically, whether it's kids at school or whether it's a dentist, an activist, what have you, to people who are actually losing their lives in the Middle East. Because this conflict now is clearly stretched out into Syria. There was a bombing in Iran. There was a bombing in Yemen. There was a bombing in Syria. And so how do we reconcile communication and relationships with people that are like, how do we call them in? How do we call in people who have huge influence and platforms, whether they're political or actresses or I don't know. I mean, Patrisse and I have been like kind of scanning. I mean, people have become thought leaders in this moment who are everything from director producers to actors, I mean, like people who have no expertise on the Middle East and conflict or trauma are now like just huge viral videos. And so how do we call them into what you're thinking about, Rabbi Brous? And then you're so eloquent. Like I saw some of the conversations you've had recently, and I was like, oh, she's really talented at the calling in. How do we do that at scale? How do we call people in? Because we can't, as Patrisse says, we can't shit on them. We want them to be a part of our community, but how do we call them into peace being on the table?
So I'm not timidly dancing around the margins of social media. I'm completely disengaged from social media. And I think it's the only reason that the only way that I really survived the last 5 months. I mean, I had to act. I've never been so deeply in it. I never got on board, not because of the toxicity, but I didn't like when I saw colleagues of mine posting and then tracking how many people liked their posts. I mean, I'm talking like early days before the, not the death threats and not the, like the kind of human sludge and that's attracted on social media. I'm talking about just the way that people started to orient their hearts around their public perception rather than around who they were at their core. So I never got into it from the start, but every now and then I would post something. But then after October 7th, I really felt like I love human beings. And I mean, I'm a rabbi, and I don't think one should go into the clergy if they don't actually love human beings, right? I also don't think that we should become organizers and activists and journalists if we don't love and care about human beings. But it was making me hate myself and others to read the kind of violent language that I was seeing. And it felt like there was a kind of psychological warfare that was happening, and it was penetrating the depths of my soul, and I didn't need to allow it to. I could actually make a choice to turn it off and to read a book instead. And so I did, like, I just literally starting October 12th or something, I just said, I'm not looking anymore. Whatever's happening out there, on one level, it's important for me to know about it, just as a kind of spiritual leader. And so I have people who will tell me there's something important that you need to see that went down, but I am not in the day to day because it was hurting my heart and my soul. And I want to keep loving people. I want to keep believing that most people in the world are good and decent and compassionate people who really just want to be able to put their kids to bed safely with a full belly every night, and when you get so deeply entrenched in the algorithm, you cannot hold that core belief anymore. And I know that the algorithm doesn't represent humanity, but you can't read that much encounter that much toxicity and have it not into your system. So I'm out. Okay. So I'm lucky. I have a team, and the team posts for me what they think people need to see. I really disengaged from it. So to your question about how do we reach people whose messaging is problematic and even perpetuating false narratives, and driving people apart from each other, which might even lead to acts of violence. I don't believe, this won't surprise you, that the answer is to write competing social media posts that are going to convince them otherwise. Although I am grateful when there are people with good sense who put things out that, people who have the stomach for it, I don't, who can actually put out messaging that helps, reinforce a different message. I actually think, and I got a lot of shit for this. Sorry, Patrisse, can I say that in front of you? I got a lot of shit for this, after October 7th, because I've invested so many years in racial justice spaces and economic justice and climate justice, and like the movement spaces have been my political home and in many ways my spiritual home. And I always saw that there was like a kind of latent anti-Semitism in those spaces, from graduate school, undergrad. And I always felt that the only response to that is to deepen relationship and to continue to invest and build, and we'll learn each other and we'll understand each other. And so after October 7th, there were a lot of, there were a number of people out in the world who were like, I told you so. I told you that the world looked the way that it did, and you were naive, and you endangered us by being part of, of a movement that ultimately is not full of latent anti-Semitism, but overt anti-Semitism. And I think on some level, I was naive about it. And I did, because I really did. I wanted to contextualize, and I wanted to believe that if people understood more about each other, and if they knew me and understood me and my family, that we could change hearts and minds. So on some level, I was a little bit naive, and on some level, I was also right that the only way to respond to ideas that you feel are harmful is to articulate other ideas that you feel can lead us on a path toward healing. And people can't hear those other ideas unless you're in relationship with them. And so I do believe now that, I mean, if we have the opportunity to engage people who are putting out ideas on social media or in public discourse that we feel are harmful, to try to engage them and to share why these ideas are hurtful, not by humiliating them. I don't do the shame and blame thing. I don't do the cancel thing. I just try to meet sorrow with sorrow. Most of the people who express ideas that I find really horrific are heartbroken. Can we see what's breaking them? Because I'm also heartbroken, and we're probably heartbroken about some of the same things. And if we can actually meet sorrow with sorrow and meet vulnerability with vulnerability, we may be able to transform our language, which might then transform our reality. So that's my, that's the best response that I can come to right now. And I want my message, when I prepare a sermon every Shabbat or write an op-ed, I want that message to be to come from a place of hope and love and real clarity about what the challenges are, and a real sense of possibility of where we could go. I don't want all of that to be clouded by the cruelest voices that are out there who think that, all of my family and I should die, and that would be the way toward liberation. And I don't want it to be clouded by all the people who think that everyone else's family should die, and that's the only way toward Jewish liberation. Like I don't need to be clouded by that. I have a morally clear understanding of how we need to engage with each other in order to begin to mend what's been torn apart here. And so I want to offer that voice as clearly as I can, and then do the real work of building relationship with people who don't see it the way I do, so that we can grow together. And ultimately, all of us can have a more expansive understanding of both what's broken and what we can do to help begin to heal it.
As someone who is in large part been shaped by my own trauma, and over the past few years with all of the work I do around women life freedom and Massa Amini, gotten to know my parents' trauma uniquely and closely, really intensely. It's been so transformative seeing my parents through this lens, because there's so much about them I didn't understand. And now that I can stand with them where they've been standing for 45 years, which is in a permanent state of heartbreak, all this unlock has happened, being able to stand where they stand and see what they see. And so when I think about the trauma of Black Americans, Black Jewish people, Black Israeli people, Jewish people, Israeli people, and then the flood opened. Then all of a sudden I was hit with Yemenis, Syrian, Iraq, North African, Afghanistan. Like all of this intense region that so many of us are from. Like we're just from this place. And we had a lot of unprocessed trauma that has like just come to the surface so intensely. My friends that I've had for decades who've never spoken of Israel or the Holocaust or There's their relationship to Zionism and the relationships between Black Americans and Jewish people, where gay people fit in all of this, and what our role and who our allyship was belonging to, and the, the trauma of Muslims and Arabs, and specifically Palestinians. And all of a sudden, all my friends wanted to unload like 100 years of history on each other that we just never talked about before. I never told my friends that my wife's uncle, was one of the 5 hostages that just came home 160 days ago. Uh, the morality police and being held overnight, and you have yours, and Patrisse, you have yours. And so in a world in where our trauma is really alive in this moment, in our physical bodies and our feelings. I mean, you could see it in the room last night when you asked everyone to stand, that was heartbroken. I was like really moved to see. I honestly thought that if everyone was really feeling vulnerable in that moment, that probably all of us would have stood up. And I wanted to stand up, not because I am in losing someone yet, but that I just wanted to stand up because I feel heartbroken inside. And so trauma, how do we make it a resource? Like, I feel like my trauma gives me access to empathy for you and for Patrisse. It makes me so interested in your family's history and your story and how you feel about your family and your safety, and makes me concerned for you, makes me care about you. I want to know like that you're okay. I want to know that Patrisse is okay. I want to know that Patrisse's son is okay. I want to know that he's going to grow up and he's going to go on to become a big version of Patrisse. I want to see his kids. I want my kids to play with his kids. And I just think about this relationship to each other. And so I sort of wonder, we've been taught to think that our trauma is bad, something to hide, to be ashamed of. You know, don't tell anyone what's hurt you. How do we turn trauma into a energy source, a powerful opportunity to see each other in a different way?
Well, part of the endless amount of work I've done to heal from the endless amount of trauma I've experienced has not just been like talk therapy, although I love talk therapy. And for a long time, I was on a campaign that I said a part of Black people's reparations package is we each should get a competent, culturally competent therapist as part of our healing process. Yeah, that was like a big, when I wrote When They Call You a Terrorist, I told that and to everybody, and it made a headline. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize it'd make a headline. But I also believe in like body work, because I do believe that our trauma, and it's not my belief, once again, science, trauma is stored in our bodies. And so it's, you know, we got to do work. Like, we could talk it out, but we have to do work to process it. And so for me, you know, part of that is just really tapping into our bodies and tapping into ourselves and giving ourselves that spaciousness. For a long time in the Black community, the conversation around trauma was taboo. And I imagine that a lot of communities who suffered from trauma, to talk about it means that it's revealed, and the vulnerability of that can feel scary. But I really do think there's power in being vulnerable, and power into being honest about that trauma. And when you ask about like, how do we use trauma, I'll say it differently. Trauma is one thing, and then there's a response to that trauma. It's the reason the 3 of us are alive and on this call is because we're resilient. Human beings are resilient. Otherwise, none of us would have survived what our own lives and what our people have survived. But human beings are resilient. And we access that resilience through our lives. And part of that looks like having faiths, being in a synagogue, being in a temple, dancing outside amongst the trees. These are ways in which we access resilience. And so I also think, earlier, um, Rabbi Brous, you talked about these small, intimate, sacred spaces. Those spaces are so important because they allow us to process the traumas that we've been through so that we can be full human beings. It's why so many faiths have like services. Services are not just for services sake, it's so you could be in community, so you could sing together, so you could dance together. We have all of these things in our cultural practices that help us process being a human being. Did we imagine that we'd end up in this kind of world and have to deal with the things we're dealing with right now? Probably not. But our people have experienced so much madness throughout the years, and yet we have survived because of resilience, because of these kinds of conversations and thoughts and practices that actually focus on healing, peace, resilience, care. That's the only way we've survived, because a few people were like, actually, I don't think we need to do that to each other. We may want to do something differently so we can live longer and be together longer. So I really look at like the practices of my ancestors that helped us survive. I think about Black people's use of music, and I think about, Black people's use of writing and all of these things to process collectively why we're here. And then not just focusing on the trauma, but focusing on our resilience. It's why I think, as part of the evolution of BLM, you started to hear us talk about Black joy. It's why Oakland has a Black Joy Parade, because after a while, you see too many police shootings on your YouTube channel, and you're like, I don't want to do that anymore. That doesn't actually make me feel like I want to live. What makes me feel like I want to live? Dancing in the street with my community, seeing us, laughing, smiling, being joyful. All those um, social media posts, Moj, that you send me of Iranian people dancing and singing, even though it's illegal, that's like our humanness. Because how do you make joy illegal? It's like not actually possible because it's inside of us.
Amen. I love this. I love this. We were talking about joy a lot last night, and because I actually feel I mean I see joy as a spiritual and moral imperative. It is essential that we allow ourselves to experience real joy. And I think for activists and for people who are just awake to the pain in the world, we feel guilty about joy often. And like it's we're taking our eyes off the prize for a moment, and it doesn't feel right to dance and to sing and to be wholehearted when we're also brokenhearted. And I really have come to see how that the experience of laughter and the experience of dance and song are absolutely essential to the nourishment that our souls need in order to be human in the world, and in order to be activists, in order to actually have the fuel that we need to fight for a different kind of future. So I love that so much. I really love that, and I'm so struck. We have this practice. The I mean, I spoke a little bit about the practice of Shabbat earlier, but every Friday night we have a particular service that we do, Kabbalat Shabbat, when the sun goes down. And first, just the orienting of our time by nature, calling us to look and see that the sun is going down, and therefore we're entering into sacred time. And then having a period of 25 hours where we engage the world totally differently until there are 3 stars in the sky. So you're kind of like called to lift your gaze away from your phone and your deadline, everything, to kind of sync up with nature in a different way. But our practice at Kabbalat Shabbat at this Friday night service is we sing these ancient psalms that are about singing out to God. And I'm so struck by it, like that every single week, for 2,000 years, or at least 1,500 years, that that like my ancestors, even facing really horrific realities in, pogroms and crusades and, and gas chambers, would lift up their voice and sing psalms that called us into song together. And that, for me, that's such a powerful reminder of how much the soul needs song and how much we need to dance. And for us, often always in the same room, there's joy and pain. And in the same service, we have our memorial prayers, and we also have our kind of ecstatic, feet off the ground prayers. And I love that the heart can hold it all, and that the space can hold it all, that it's actually designed for that. And I think for people who don't find that in faith-based spaces, that's okay. We just need to know that we need to build that in other spaces, where we feel like our heart can actually sing. And it's part of the reason I wanted to build ICAR in the first place. Was I felt that, in many ways, we who were the inheritors of this great tradition of singing at the end of every horrible week, throughout history, had forgotten how to find song. And it became very perfunctory and kind of routine, and that we had to be able to just like sometimes just open the heart and let it all flow out, the joy, the pain, the grief, the longing, the yearning. And that is part of a trauma response. That is, creating a kind of rhythmic engagement with other people, with movement, with song, is a trauma response and a way to build resiliency. And now we know that, from the science now bears that out. I think the ancients didn't understand. They didn't know the science, but they understood the power of those kind of activities. And so many ancient cultures and traditions draw upon the same tools of song and dance and movement and gathering, connecting with other humans. And there's so much that's wise for us there. And, I think part of what's so broken in our culture right now is that not only do we not use the tools of song and dance, but we don't gather either. We don't know how to find our way to each other. And so we're each of us an island right now, but actually the great response to trauma is togetherness and kind of navigating the rough seas with one another, inviting each other onto our islands so that we don't have to experience this great upheaval alone. Moj, I also want to respond to something that you said earlier, because you're so empathic, and I'm so moved by the way that you process you see the world through a lens that is really honest about where the pain has been for you and for your family. And Patrisse, I'm increasingly convinced that you do that as well. That the more in touch you are with your family, your own family story and your own trauma, the more it actually opens you up to make space for other people's trauma. And I will often say, though it upsets people, that it's precisely because I'm so deeply rooted in my Jewish tradition and my Jewish history and my own family story of survival and trauma, that I feel so connected to the Palestinian people and to their own need for dignity and for home and for self-determination. And I don't think that those things are mutually exclusive. I think that actually we're very well suited to understand each other, because we yearn for the same things in the world. We who yearn for home should understand people who yearn for home. We who feel like the whole world doesn't care about our pain should really identify with people who feel that they've been abandoned by the world. And so that for me has been a guiding force through these times. And it's definitely painful when I don't feel like that empathy is returned. And so much of what people in our Jewish community have been expressing, and I've also felt, is a kind of existential loneliness, where it feels like we've cultivated through our kind of post-Holocaust trauma this sense of universal responsibility and care and justice, this strong impetus to get up and make the world more just and fair and loving, precisely because of what has happened to us. And it doesn't feel like others feel that same sense of shared responsibility for our safety and for our future. And that's so painful. I've identified it as loneliness. I know that it's loneliness. um and also we're not alone, because there's you, Patrisse Cullors, and there's you, Moj, and there's so many people who are like, wait, I think I actually do envision a collective liberation story that you're also part of. And so how can we lift up the voices that see that our liberation is really all tied up in one another, and that allow our own trauma and pain and history to open our hearts to each other rather than shut it down? And like, where's that chorus? Because I want to sing in that chorus together. I want to move in that sacred circle. And I think that's part of the challenge, and also the opportunity of this moment.
Well, I could talk to both of you for a long time, but I want to be respectful of time. I have one final question for both of you, and a thought. You're both incredibly nurturing. You're both givers. What can this audience do for you? What do you need help with? From a vulnerable space, what can you use?
That's such a great question, Moj. I feel like women are not taught to receive or to ask for things, just to give. So I actually appreciate the practice of this.
Well, we're going to be in a non-binary space, Patrisse.
You're right. You're right. We're gonna
let go of some of these stories.
Let's release, friend.
And we're gonna operate in a world in where I can ask, what do you need from our audience and from the mother tongue audience? And you can share with us from a vulnerable space what would be helpful to you.
You know, I think the thing that came to me the minute you asked that, like the moment you asked it, was I need people to spend less of their time shaming and blaming each other, and more of their time actively engaging in coalition and connecting. That is like the broader, it's like not for Patrisse Cullors specifically, but it is for me and us.
Well, I want to know for you, Patrisse Cullors, what can you do?
I don't know, Moj. I don't know if there's things I want people to give to me.
Not give.
I want people to show up differently. I really do. I'm longing and desiring my therapist always tells me, like, I really, I do well, like, when I'm in connection. Like, I'm not one of those people. I'm not a big isolator. Like, it's actually when I feel isolated, or, you know, I like a lot of people at my house at once. Like, I feel I get more resourced when there's a lot of people around, and these days I don't know who I can be around. These days don't feel as easy to be in connection and be around people. These days I look at some people who I thought I knew, social media accounts, and I'm like, I don't want to have to do anything with that response. And that doesn't make that makes me feel icky. It doesn't make me feel good. And so I think it is for me then, which is like, can you show up differently? Can you even for like 1%, 2% show up differently, just to open your space and body for a different story? Can you just take that opportunity? And, you know, Moj, you know this because we've both been doing this, and Rabbi Brous, I'm sure you have too. I've talked to so many different type of people who I never ever thought in my whole entire life that I would be in conversation with. I promise you. And I've been pleasantly surprised. Listen, I may be naive. People may be, you know, telling me things they think I want to hear. But I do think I've had some pretty courageous conversations with people. Both of us, right? Like me saying things or sharing things or getting hard questions, and same thing. And what I've recognized is all people want to do is be listened to, heard, allied with. And I feel like I want that. I want to be heard, listened to, allied with. And I think that that's what I need from this audience.
Good.
I feel like I am one of the people that you know, reached out to after October 7th. And I mean, we've been on the street together many times. And I don't think we ever had a conversation until after October 7th, and not a one-on-one. And you're like, we need to know each other and be in conversation with one another. And I was so stunned by that, Patrisse, and so grateful. And Moj, you too. I mean, I feel this is a time of so much loss, and some of that loss is deeply personal. And I feel like there are relationships that I have that I've been cultivating and loving into for 20 years. And now I think, will we ever find our way to each other again? I don't know. And then there are the two of you, who are like, well, let's find our way to each other. And so I really see that you did, like, you both did that. You made that happen. And so, I mean, I was thinking exactly like you were. When you asked, what do I need from this audience? The first thing I just wanted to say is, like, just turn to each other with tenderness. Just like put down your weapon, whether your weapon is like a real weapon or a weapon of words. Just stop fighting and maybe turn to each other in sorrow and just engage from a place of brokenheartedness and open-heartedness. And then you pushed Patrisse to answer more personally. And I mean, so I'm doing both. That's my big picture, like my big takeaway from my book is, like, turn to each other, don't retreat, find your way to each other with tenderness right now. And my personal response is, anti-Semitism is the death of democracy. You can't have an anti-racist society where anti-Semitism is thriving. My people have to be a part of the picture of what a liberated society looks like. And anti-Semitism is a form of racism. And so, like, instead of segmenting out and justifying and excusing, which is what I'm seeing so much of in a lot of the spaces that we share, just I need people to show up in a different way and to understand that we're also just human beings. We're also just human beings trying to live in this world with a lot of trauma, a lot of fear, a long history of, of actually being, unsafe everywhere we've ever lived in the world. It operates differently from other forms of racism, but it is a form of racism. And so I want to invite people to recognize that the struggle to build a just and loving society really has to include all of us. And we have so much to learn from each other and so much work that we need to do to see each other fully in our humanity. And I have full faith that we can do that. And that doesn't even require, the greatest imagination, imagining a demilitarized Middle East in which all people are thriving. Like, this just requires us to open our hearts just a little bit and actually see each other. We have to be allies in the work of building a just and loving society. And I know that we can do that.
My ask of the audience is to support the work of these two women, to pick up a copy of the Amen Effect and support this incredible body of work and thought leadership, and to support Patrisse's work and understand abolition, which I am learning more and more about every day, and to hold space for women, life, freedom. And in that world, there is no room for anti-Semitism and racism and gender apartheid, and to dream. I really just want everyone to go back to dreaming again. And I've been listening nonstop to music I used to listen to when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, when I was my most vividly dreaming. Dreaming of the life I have today, dreaming of being an entrepreneur, being a parent. I think about all those dreams. I was reading through my journals, but I've been really trying to listen back to those records because I invite everyone to dream and to tap back into that part of you that was wildly ruthless about the things you wanted in life. and dreaming before everyone convinced you that you were ridiculous and that you had to shrink your expectations of yourself and others. And so, any final thoughts or words from either one of you? I want to make sure you feel that you have space to say anything you wanted to say in closing.
I mean, Patrisse, you started by saying that you're in mourning for Kikanza, your beautiful mentor, and I hope that her memory reverberates in this world for generations, and I hope that you can see that you have become for so many people what your mentor was for you. Just the image of strength and beauty and hope, and love. And I hope you know that you also have that reverberative power in the world. I feel it. I've felt it since long before you called me after October 7th. So make Kanza's memory always be a blessing.
Shay, I mean, thank you. Thank you. I think I just want to send a lot of love to Gaza right now. I want to send a lot of love to families who are waiting on their loved ones who are being held hostage in Gaza. I want to send a lot of love to the collective spirit that is deeply weighed down by witnessing so much suffering. And I want to remind all of us that we don't have to live like this, that something else is possible. And I am holding the possibility of all of it because it's the only way that makes me feel good on the inside.
Thank you both so much for doing this. Thank you to our friends at Mother Tongue. I love you both so much. You can call on me. I request that you call on me to support your work with your big problems, with your hard problems, with your problems that you don't want to tell other people about. I request you call me. And I request that you think of me as that person that will help you think about doing impossible things. That's my request of both of you, and not now, but for a long time and for always. I request you call me because I enjoy this work. It makes me feel alive, and makes me feel closer to my grandmother and my ancestors, and it makes me feel closer to home. And so my prayer for everyone is that we all get to go home. Okay. Thank you both so much.